Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Today I'm going to be playing with a stamp set from Love from Lizi's latest release. This stamp set was actually in the July card kit last year and it's called Summer Fruits and has now been re-released if you want to get hold of it again. As it's from last year, I do already have some videos showcasing this stamp set, so if you want to check those out I will link to them in the top right hand corner. I'm going to be using one of the girls from the stamp set, and this is the girl that's facing away from you, and I want to make it look as though she is sunbathing, and I'm going to be doing no line colouring on my card. So I started by stamping her out into the lower right hand corner of my card base with Barely Beige ink. I did double stamp her just to make sure the lines show up nicely on video. I could see them well enough with one stamping, but I just thought that would help a bit for you lot to see it as well. So I will be colouring with my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers. These are my alcohol markers. If you have Copics or Ohuhu markers or whatever you may have, you can use those instead. And you can see the caps on screen for the Illustrator markers I'm using. I'm starting with her skin and I'm giving her a kind of medium brown skin tone. Obviously she's sunbathing, so I don't want her to be really pale. And I probably used more shades than I needed to on her skin because she is really quite delicate, and this cream card base works fine with alcohol markers, but it's not designed for alcohol markers, so I did get a little bit of bleeding. Nothing too terrible, but just something to bear in mind. I probably should have used Nina Solar White for my card base instead, but I liked the idea of the cream, so that's what I went with. As she is sunbathing, we have the light coming from above her, so I put my shadows in accordingly, so they were kind of around the edges, and then the highlight is down the middle. After I'd finished her skin, I did quickly go in and put some colour on her bikini. I was originally going to do it orange, but it did not show up at all against her skin, so I switched to red, and because it's such a small area, I didn't bother putting any shading there, I just did flat red. We are then going to move on to her hair, and the hair is a huge focal point on these girls, I think. Very pretty hair. I will start with my darkest colour, and I'm using golden brown for the darkest colour. I'm also going to bring in some more kind of orangey tones. I'm working with flicking motions, starting at the base of her hair and anywhere where it kind of overlaps. And I am using the brush tip on some of my markers. I have the older Illustrator markers, they re-released them recently, and the newer ones have upgraded nibs because these older ones that I have, the nibs have a tendency to fray. So the markers that have not yet frayed, I'm using the brush tip, but the ones that have frayed, which for me is basically all of my lighter colours because I think I use the lighter colours more, I did use the bullet tip on those just because the brush nib is hopeless. So I am going to be replacing these with the newer nibs as soon as I can. If you'd like to know more about how to colour hair and skin, I do recommend checking out the classes over at Kit and Clouder. Elise teaches those classes and she is very good teacher, and they are a great way to learn more about how to use your alcohol markers. Okay, so then once I was happy with all my colouring, I'm going to work on my background, and as I said, I want her to be sunbathing and I'm going to give her a little towel. So I actually used a die, one of the smaller dies from Cat Scrappiness's Never Ending Rectangle die set. I cut that out from the middle of a piece of scrap paper and I kept both the negative and the positive portion. So I laid the positive portion, which is the little rectangle, over my girl to work out the positioning, and then put the negative portion over that and removed the positive piece so that I can ink blend the towel around her. I wanted to give her a purple towel, so I'm using Seedless Preserves Distress ink, which is a nice dark purple, but you can use any colour you want here, of course. I thought the purple would stand out nicely against the yellowy cream background because purple and yellow are complementary. And I'm just using a small ink blending brush, actually this is a makeup brush, to add the colour through that opening in my scrap paper. I do like to make sure I can lift the paper up from time to time to check how it looks without removing the whole thing, because then I know if I need to add more ink or not. and I just keep working in layers and building up the intensity until I am happy with the colour. And I did skip through this a bit because you don't want to watch me ink blending for half an hour. It didn't really take half an hour, but it's just the same thing, working backwards and forwards with the brush. Then I will swap and I will put the towel mask in place. I'm not quite sure what the issue was here. It did not want to stay stuck down. I generally create my masks with scrap paper and Tombow monomolte liquid glue. I let the glue dry to its tacky state, which means it will be repositionable, and I've never had a problem with it before. For whatever reason, this little rectangle just did not want to stay in place. I think it might be because there was so much ink built up on the mask of the girl, which is obviously still in place because I don't want to get this ink on her. So I think maybe that was interfering with the stickiness of my rectangle mask. In any case, I used a larger blending brush here and Wild Honey Distress Oxide, and I'm just building up the look of sand. I wanted to enhance that card base colour because it's kind of sandy already, but I just thought it needed a bit something extra. So that's why I'm using the Wild Honey here, and I'll just blend that all over. And I do let this fade out, not to white, but to the card base colour, because I'm not covering the whole card base. You could, if you wanted, cover the whole card base, but I wanted to confine my ink blending a bit more, confine my design towards the bottom of my card. Keep it a bit more clean and simple, because I do like to make clean and simple designs quite often. Next, to add the texture of sand, I'm going to add some splatters. So I have pressed the Wild Honey just a little bit onto a stamping block, spritzed it with some water. This water has Perfect Pearls in it, which is just because that's the closest spray bottle of water I have. You don't necessarily need to add that shimmer with the Perfect Pearls, but you can if you want. I then picked it up with a paintbrush and did some tapping and could not get the drops to splatter. Clearly I'm out of practice because I took some time off from crafting this spring and have only been back a couple of weeks, and this is the first time I've added splatter to any of my projects since then, and it just was not cooperating. I got some big splatters that I didn't like. I tried to lift them up and realised my paper towel I was using had black ink, so I got black smudges on my card base. Luckily they came off with an eraser, a rubber, and it didn't make too much of a mess, and I just took a deep breath and got back into it. I did also pick up the little bit of Wild Honey from my craft mat and tried to flick that as well, but then I gave up. I decided that colour wasn't right anyway, and I swapped to Tea Dye Distress Ink, which I think will work a lot better to make that sandy effect. So I'm going to press that onto my acrylic block, again mix it with water, and this time I remember how to do my splatters. I flick them off the side of the stamping block, and this works so much better. It gives a nice splattery effect all over that corner where I want my sand to be, and this is a great way to add texture to sand. With that done, I will remove my masks. I'm going to use my reverse tweezers for this, just so that I don't get my fingers in anything. The rectangle came off really easily. As I said, it didn't want to stick anyway, so of course it did. And of course my little girl mask did not want to come off at all. It had stuck down quite well. Luckily it did not tear. I just very carefully eased it up with my tweezers and kind of worked along, pulling the glue up and away. I was careful not to rip the mask because usually I reuse them, but actually this one's so saturated in that Seedless preserves that I did just bin it. Next I'm going to use some colouring pencils to add a little bit more detail. For example, there are some places where that purple ink did not get all the way up to the edges of my stamping. So I found a purple pencil that matched the colour of the Seedless preserves pretty well, and I just filled in any areas of blank space there. I then switched to a brown pencil, and I'm going to add more detail into her hair, and I'm doing the same flicking motions that I did with my alcohol markers. This just adds the look of strands of hair and makes it look more realistic. So again, I'm following the lines of her head and the lines of the hair. If you'd used a black ink, for example, so that you could see the stamp lines, then it's just following the stamping lines. These stamps in particular do have the lines of the hair, or some of the lines of the hair drawn in, so it's very clear where you need to add that. And the key here is a really sharp pencil. You do want to keep that end nice and sharp so you can get nice fine lines. I did actually do this with 2 different shades of brown, although I'm only going to show the one and I'm not going to show all of it because it took quite a while. I did also use a red pencil to add just a tiny bit of shading to her bikini and to draw in the ties of her bikini bottoms. The next thing I'm going to do is stamp my sentiment, which is from the same stamp set. Initially I was stamping this with the Beige and I did not like the way it looked, so I switched to Altenew's Paper Bag Ink, which is a nice brown ink, and I thought matched her hair quite well, and also does kind of make it look like the sentiment is drawn in the sand. I mean, it's a bit dark to actually be drawn in the sand, but I thought it worked better than using black. The very last thing I'm going to do is add dots to her towel. I thought that would add some interest. I have 3 different widths of white gel pens here, a 5, an 8 and a 10. The 10 is the largest and the 5 is the narrowest. I initially started going in adding my polka dot design with the 5. I do actually switch over to the 10 because I wanted large-ish dots, and rather than having to swirl with the 5 I could just dot with the 10. I do, however, use the 5 for adding any partial dots where they're coming up from underneath her, because obviously the towel is an entire design, so if you imagine her on top of it, there will be places where the dots are partially covered by her body or her hair or whatever. So I made sure to use the finer point gel pen to add partial dots here and there just to make it look like the pattern is truly continuous. If you're having trouble with your pen flowing, what I like to do is scribble it on the edge of my finger. I think the heat helps to get it going a bit. I mean, you can scribble it on paper if you prefer, if you have some scratch paper off to the side, but I find it works better if I scribble it on my skin, and it does wash off easily enough, so there's no problems with that. And when I'd finished adding all the dots, then that completed my clean and simple summer card featuring Love from Lizi's Summer Fruits stamp set. As I said, this has just been released in the latest Love from Lizi release, and if you're a subscriber to her kits, you can add this in to come with your June kit, and I believe you have until tomorrow morning to add this as an add-on to your kit. If you did enjoy this video, please leave me a comment down below. You could let me know what your favourite summer activity is. Do press the thumbs up button to let me know if you liked it. And if you'd like to find me elsewhere on the internet, you can find links to my social media, my Patreon, and my blog. There's an accompanying blog post down there in the description box. There's also links to all the products used, and those are affiliate links, so if you use them, then thank you very much for your support. You can also subscribe by clicking the big red button below. There are a couple of videos showing on screen right now if you'd like to see more from me right away. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!